Hi, my name's Tim Marriott and I'm with Alberta History Tours. At Alberta History Tours, we help you to discover Alberta's history, and sometimes it's hidden in plain sight. We talked earlier about Christmas, and we talked about the year 1879-1880. I'd like you to try to imagine the River Valley now without all of the modern city around, the buildings, the roadways, the constant noise that a city makes in these days. Behind me, you see the legislature building, you see all of those high-rise buildings. Imagine that all of those are away, and in place of the legislature building, you see old Fort Edmonton. Strung out along the high bank, you see a few cabins, and over a cluster that would have been east of where the McDonald Hotel is now, the beginnings of the Edmonton settlement. The Edmonton of 1879-80 was just a small community indeed. See, 1879-1880 was a watershed year for change at Edmonton. In 1879, the telegraph had arrived at Edmonton. Later that year, in October of 1879, the first agricultural fair, which signaled a change in what Edmonton was about, took place on the river flats, just opposite us. Also, within a year, in 1880, partly because of the telegraph, the first newspaper came. The long-delayed Pacific Railway was sort of back on track. And so 1879-1880, especially that New Year's of New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, indicated a rapid change that was about to bring the modern world into this ancient, magnificent river valley. The fur trade tradition had been that the chief factor would invite people to his house on New Year's Eve, and as Leviza McDougall, wife of John A. McDougall, pioneer merchant, wrote in a letter to her brother, the elite of the new Edmonton community was invited. That included her and her husband, John. So they went to Hardesty's big house, where chief factor had his guests entertained by a program of music, song, and recitations. So if you'd like to try to locate where Chief Factor Hardesty's big house was, and big house was what the name of the chief factor's residence was always called, use the legislature dome to be your marker, and the house was just a little bit east of where that dome sits now. The concert was well attended by the elite that Leviza mentions in her letter. And we know what the program was because the Saskatchewan Herald, the newspaper published in Battleford, included a complete rundown of the evening's entertainment. So among the patriotic poems, recitations, and songs, serious and humorous, were things like the Yarn of the Nancy Bell. I mention that one because when I was in school, more than 80 years later, that was one of the poems we had to memorize. So it was written by W.S. Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan, and was a very popular sort of music hall number or party turn that people used to do in those days. But there was an interesting poem included on the program which was uniquely Edmonton, and it was a poem called Pemmican, which was written by Edmonton's own Donald Ross, pioneer miner, market gardener, hotelier, and leading citizen involved in everything that was going on at Edmonton. So he wrote his poem Pemmican, which included some of the choice lines such as, "One little matter I near forgot, but nothing more than picking out the hair. First, take your axe, and with well-directed blows, mince fine your meat. It saves your teeth much toil." So Donald Ross's poem, of course, was a big hit for the party. And of course, being the times, everything ended with the singing of God Save the Queen. And then to bring in the new year, a 6-gun salute was fired by the fort cannon into this river valley where we're standing now. The next day, on New Year's Day, all of the people gathered on the riverbanks. And here's where the long-standing tradition at the fort of having a sports day then followed and occurred on the ice below us on the river. Now, this was an exciting event every year, and there's even prize money for winning the various races. So in 1880 now, January 1st, 1880, the events included the downhill snowshoe race. Can you imagine going downhill in the snow for a prize of $5? There was also a 3-legged snowshoe race, a sack race in deep snow, with the added innovation of having the participants sewed into the sack. And there was also the blindfolded sleigh race. And it was noted that perhaps not all of the denizens of the fort had not had a few drinks as they watched the events. So of course, as all of these sports days ended, it ended with a great tug of war. So there have been many such events during the fur trade days at Fort Edmonton. Peter Erasmus notes this in his memoirs of his days coming to Fort Edmonton around the same time. But as we mentioned, 1879 was the watershed year where everything was changing. This was perhaps the last time that Fort Edmonton was able to enjoy its fur trade traditions as a remote fur trade community separated from the world. Telegraphs, railways, and all kinds of modern inventions soon would change the Edmonton community.